So here we have it, Pasadena Ponchev bread, baked in this little oven here with the brick. And what you do is you get a tea towel and you run the tea towel out lengthways, and you put your bread in there. You roll your dough out really thin and you put it in the tea towel, floured tea towel, and roll it up in the tea towel and leave it in the sun just along there. And that's what I did. I just left it in there, in that little area there, and it grew and it grew and it grew, and it probably took about 6 hours to grow. It's a sort of like a fermented dough, and there's no yeast in there. But it is fermented with yeast to begin with, because to get the sour process up and going, it just takes a wee bit too long. So this is more or less a sourdough, but the yeast has all been eaten up in the fermentation process the night before. But in this case, I made the process 2 days ago and I left it, and then I mixed my dough and let it rise, and then I knocked it back once, and I let it come back up again, and then I knocked it back and formed my bread in the tea towel, floured up, and I put it down there in the sun and left it there early this morning. And then when I came back this afternoon, I unrolled the tea towel out onto my oven tray with the pizza stones. So what you do is you bring the whole tray out and you put roll your bread out onto the tray from the tea towel, and then you give it a few cuts and leave it for 20 minutes to completely relax. And in the meantime, you've got your oven on and you've got it going full bore. And what you do then is you get a pot. I get the cup and I fill it with water, hot boiling water, and I put that at the bottom of the oven. And then I put warm water in there, and I immerse my hands in there and just flick it in with my fingers into the oven until and just keep putting it in and keep flicking with your fingers, and you build up a really high amount of steam. And by flicking it in with your fingers, you're creating a pretty even spray, so you're not going to dampen the the oven too much or put the fire out, so to speak, because it's a gas oven. And subsequently you close the door and you don't touch that oven for 20 minutes. And in this case, I've blocked off this vent hole here. I don't know where it gets its oxygen from, but I blocked this hole off here with anything that I can find. In this case, I used this. And there's your French bread. But the moral, the way to finesse it is by putting it in the tea towel and wrapping it up in the tea towel and leaving it for about 6 hours to mature and grow, and then unrolling it onto the pizza stone out here and giving it its cuts and leaving it to relax. And once it's relaxed, it's going to be able to jump when you put it into the oven. It'll spring up and double its, well, not quite double its size, but it'll increase its size by about at least a third. And that's the result. And the only difference with this bread and the bread made at Ponchev, Pasadena Bakery, was that we washed our bread, because in those days people weren't used to this rustic type bread, and everything was shiny. So yeah, that's what the old man did. He made it all nice and shiny. So there'll be a few of you out there that'll remember the baker from Pasadena and Ponchev in Auckland in New Zealand, whom in 1968 started one of the first hot bread shops off in the country. And he was quite unique in his own way, and him and his family got together and stood alone against all criticism and endured, and subsequently they were making good money back in a time when there was a recession. And I'll never forget the criticism that the old boy copped for starting a business in a recession. And in those days you could buy a dozen rolls for 36 cents, 1 cent each, and you always got one extra. And that oven that we had, it took 17 trays and it was working flat out. So I can't remember, it was four of these to a tray. So that's 44, 68 loaves of bread at a time at 25 cents each. There wasn't much of a profit in that, but the profit was in the buns and the donuts and the small stuff and the bit of cake. Not too much cake, just a wee bit of cake, but predominantly bread, artisan type bread. And if you want to catch up with this type of bread, there's a brother in Australia. You'll have to Google him. My Twin Loaves. He'd be a champion baker, that boy, and he would eat me for breakfast, no doubt about that. And in the bread department anyway. And but I still haven't forgotten what it's like to make a loaf of bread. So occasionally I fluke one, and so that was today. Yeah, the 10th of July 2021. So googlemo.com says push the like button and subscribe. And if you need the recipe, I don't know too much about how to upload things and that sort of thing. This is just a hobby that I'm doing. I go around filming places of interest, and that's how Google Mode came about. Googling the moment, and this is another Googling the moment episode. And but it just happened to be the bread. And yeah, so one day when I come across somebody that knows what they're doing, they'll put a recipe up there for you so that you can see it, because I don't know how to do it. So if you can remember, I normally work in cups, and it's 1 cup of water and as much flour as it will take. And what's that? 1 teaspoon of yeast, 1 cup of water, 1 teaspoon of yeast. I'd say it was a teaspoon of salt, and but in the beginning it's just 1 cup of water and flour, and made into a paste, and then just with a bit of yeast, and just left to mature. And it takes about 2 days to ferment, and then you add the rest of the flour and the salt, and you give it a real good mixing. And what I do is I emulate mechanical dough development by using a knife. Once I've formed the dough in my bowl, mixing bowl, once I've formed the dough in my mixing bowl, I tip it out onto here, and I cut it and I cut it into sections, and keep just cutting it as if it was a utensil, a mixing utensil, and that's how I get my lift, because it's very hard to get good lift when you're just using your hands. You've got to use more product, but when you use the knife, you can really develop the dough, and to the point where it goes almost to it almost gets to the point where it wants to go into chewing gum, but you don't let it go that far, and then you leave it to relax. And once it's come up, you mold it in a bit of flour and leave it, and get your shape, and wrap it up in the tea towel here, and put it in the sun somewhere where it get nice and warm. And a floured tea towel is what I use. And yeah, the rest I've already mentioned. So hopefully that'll help some people at home who want to make the old-fashioned stuff. Yeah.